Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you in partnership with Wanderers Wealth. One of the greatest challenges and also one of the greatest opportunities for digital nomads, expats, people who are building businesses abroad is in the world of international taxes. It's not the most fun subject to talk about, but it's one of the most important and confusing that I hear about all the time from those of you in the audience. So I've had Kathy on the show before. She's the CEO of Wanderers Wealth. And afterwards, I became a customer of hers because her global tax strategy design course is incredible. It literally walks you through all the steps that you need to take in order to take advantage of the international tax system that is set up to actually help those of us that are living this international lifestyle. So it's highly recommended. You can find the link in the show notes for her global tax strategy design course. Check it out and let me know what you think. My guest today is my good friend Mitko Karshovski. You may remember that name because he is a previous guest here on About Abroad, or perhaps you've heard of him because he's the host of the wildly famous That Remote Life podcast, as well as the founder of Parable and several other businesses, which is why I brought him back today. Basically, I wanted to answer a series of questions that I get asked by the audience, for which I am not an expert, but luckily Mitko is. They generally relate to how to run online businesses and live location independently. And Mitko has been doing that as a online business specialist and full-time digital nomad for many, many years, as well as interviewing hundreds of people on his podcast that do exactly that and have built thriving businesses. So I brought him back to talk a little bit about traveling the world and having a remote business and some of the up-and-coming ideas and basic foundations that you would want to have in mind if that was something you were looking to do. So I had an absolute blast picking his brain. I learned a ton. I hope you will as well. Please help me in welcoming Mitko back to About Abroad. I'm always trying to one-up you, man. That remote life has been out on the horizon, something I've been chasing for a long time, and I'm just like, just trying to one-up you in any little way that I can. My light game is on point.
Just buttering me up for this podcast. I'm concerned now.
Oh, man. I'm glad you finally were able to swing back through About Abroad, man. It's been a long time coming, but I loved our last chat and subsequent chats since then. So I'm looking forward to today. I had to get you back here because I kind of told you this. I didn't want to give you too much detail so you'd have time to prep or anything. So the reason I invited you to this show is because I get a lot of questions coming in about the About Abroad lifestyle, right? Like expat life and nomads and remote work and all these different things. And something that I don't do a lot of on the show, and I do not consider myself an expert on at all, is the entrepreneurial bit. Like people who are building remote businesses from scratch, not tech companies, not necessarily like big corporations, but people who are like entrepreneurs. They figured out a way to make this work and they're location independent. And I don't have great answers for these people. So I always tell them to go listen to your podcast. So I thought I'd bring you on and we'd have a little chat about it.
Let's do it, man. Yeah, I love to be on here anytime you'll have me and invite me on. And I'm happy to help any way I can.
Well, I mean, I don't know. What do you think about online businesses?
Starting broad, I think they're great, man. I mean, obviously, I kind of banked my career and in life on it. I dropped out of college to do it, so playing high stakes poker here. But yeah, I think to answer your question a bit more honestly, I think it's really starting to not just be online business. Like I think remote work is going to become way more entrepreneurial. And that's something that I'm very interested in, is this like businessification, entrepreneurshipification of like work, which is, I thought it was going to sound a lot smarter as I made my own word, but it ended up sounding very dumb. But I think that that's been a very interesting trend that I've been noticing recently in terms of, when I got started, it was like online business or are you an employee? And there were these very hard divides. And then now I'm starting to see those barriers sort of not being as strong or as heavy.
Yeah, I'm also noticing this trend, and it did feel like it one point, maybe this is like the whole remote work thing in general, felt a little bit inaccessible to like your layman, like the everyday person. Like if you were going to like start an online business, it's like, oh man, you got to like really know the marketing funnels and you got to understand some sort of product or service really well.
Or you were a scammer.
Yeah. Or you sold vitamins. I overheard somebody talking about that recently. I think it was Peter Levels on the My First Million podcast was talking about how like when he first was doing the digital nomad thing and he was like in Asia and coming across all these people who had like just listened to the 4-hour work week and were like online drug dealers basically.
Dude, there were so many of those people. Like I started out in e-commerce, in online business in the digital nomad world in 2016. So it was like peak scam. And even people who weren't scamming were like doing something shady. And there was so many of these like characters who were like, I drop shipping like something. And I don't know, it was just a mess. And there was so many people that like I would hear what they were doing and when you hear something and when it's like a legit thing, you're like, okay, this clicks. And then you would hear some other people talk and explain what they're doing. And the entire time I'm thinking like, I don't know what it is, but something here doesn't connect. Like something's fishy, something's missing. And lo and behold, like 2 years later, it comes out that whatever. It's like they're scamming people or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is a little bit of a stigma there, like with this whole world. And the cool thing is though, is that, I think kind of like digital nomadism has like a digital nomad sort of has like a connotation to it that I think some people might take the wrong way and like paint a picture in their head of what that means that is only represented by like a small fraction of the people who are actually out there living that lifestyle. And I think, that this could be the case in this world as well in terms of like online entrepreneurship. But the cool thing is like you, on That Remote Life, on your podcast and via Parable, you've done, I don't know how many, you've done a ton of case studies. You've talked to a bunch of entrepreneurs who have built these like legit businesses. And I think one of the cool things is, and this is what you were alluding to earlier, they can build these location independent businesses, have a successful career, maybe even have like a successful exit and cash out and live, the quote unquote dream and do it all like very legitimately without being a rocket scientist. And that's my perception. And I wonder if you feel like that's like the reality.
Yeah. The whole space is maturing, right? Like in the beginning, and I just did a panel with Gonzalo and Lauren Razavi from Safety Wing, but we talked about the fact that, in the beginning, the digital nomad movement was kind of like some back alley hack kind of things. And there was a bunch of these like, well, I can't talk about this, on air, but there was a little bit of this like feeling to a lot of like the digital nomad life, and it's just matured, right? Like a lot of like, like there's just so much infrastructure now created. Like, you're talking about acquiring businesses. I remember when Empire Flippers were one of the first people that started like having a marketplace where you could go and buy like online businesses. And it was like, oh my God, this is insane. Like you can come here and this person's selling like an Amazon FBA business for $3 million. That's insane. They sell like gym towels on Amazon. You know what I mean? Like it's like one product that's doing this. And I remember thinking like, holy crap, this is like legitimate business. And then now you have like websites like Micro Acquire who are very similar and doing all of this. Is just like it's just become a far more mature space, and it's only going to continue getting better like this. And in terms of, being able to have a nice lifestyle, like, yeah, absolutely. You don't need to be, I think this idea of successful business owners being rocket scientists is false, because we think about the people in the mainstream that are like Elon Musk and so on and so forth that are like weirdos. And the majority of business owners are not that. Like they're just people who, I always say this, like business is the art of solving problems at scale. That's all it is.
Yeah, that's a really simple way to put it.
And business is simple. There's a problem that a whole bunch of people see, that a whole bunch of people have, right? It's one that happens over and over and over again. And I find the solution that I can then, like recreate at scale without there having a huge cost in that recreation. That's all it is, right? And you don't have to be to make a solid like multi-million-dollar business that spins out. And in like media, we like to think about these people as being like essentially Iron Man, X $100,000 in cash for you, or you just have like a nice little lifestyle business where you're doing 150 in revenue and you keep 120 for yourself. Like that's also never been easier to do.
That's it. That sounds like very dreamlike for a lot of people, honestly. Like a lot of people, are grinding it out on their 50K a year jobs and like sitting in, their suburban household going like, I want to go adventure. I want to, I want to be that digital nomad that's sitting on that beach in Bali with the cash just rolling in from my Amazon shop. But I have no idea how to do that. That's not accessible for me. I'm going to set that dream to the side. And I think bridging that gap and like saying like, obviously you don't have to live that dream. That could be somebody else's dream, but like that, those things are so much more accessible. And I think one of the traits that I've caught on to, or one of the characteristics of some of these really successful businesses that I've seen, and I want to ask you if you agree, is there's the thing that you find like really sexy and fun and exciting. And then there's these things over here that are like you just said, like selling towels on Amazon. And like the selling towels on Amazon is probably one of a much clearer path to that dream than building this like dream business that you're building in your mind. I don't know. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, for every sexy idea that we all want to go do, there's like 1,000 other ones that could be maybe more profitable. Like I have friends that had a cat furniture like brand that they would design cat furniture and sell it, and they sold it for several $1,000,000. I used to work for an Amazon FBA company that used to sell adult coloring books on Amazon. So it's like geometric patterns and different like patterns that you could color in to like calm down. I think they sold for 5 million when I was with them. And there's so many of these. Like I recently heard of a guy who sells direct to consumer. So it's an online business. They're selling through a website. You're gonna think this is nuts. I have not double checked these numbers. I don't know this person personally, but I heard about him doing $3 million a month in wiener dog ramps, so that wiener dogs can get up and down off the bed, because it's like they have little feet, like they can't jump. And then if they jump off onto it, they can hurt themselves. So it's like ramps for wiener dogs. And he's doing $3 million a month in revenue, selling wiener dog ramps. So there's all of these like weird like things that you can.
And do you find like, generally speaking, you're focused on businesses that provide that remote life, right? Like this is the underlying characteristic of most of the businesses that you're kind of evaluating and studying.
Yeah, because it's like, that's my sexy thing, right? Yeah. Is like, for me, what I'm very interested in, like even beyond business, is I was actually trying to explain this to someone recently on a call. And when you're like, you don't have a phrase for it, and in mid conversation, you come up with like the best explanation you've ever had for what you're, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, actually. And it sucks when that doesn't happen, when you're like, I'm waiting for that thing to come and it just doesn't come. But
and I said to someone, and I was like, like I'm really interested in excited about working in the work from anywhere infrastructure. And I stopped and I was like, fuck, that's awesome. Like work from anywhere infrastructure. And so that's kind of like everything that goes into all the different nodes that comprise what I believe to be the future of work, which is this work from anywhere kind of reality. I'm very interested in all of it. And online business is one node of that infrastructure, right? It's just the one that I have the most background in, is the one that I've like worked the most in. And I think, like I said, it's online entrepreneurship, and how to do that online, I think is going to become way more mainstream as a skill set. Even if you don't think of yourself as an entrepreneur, I think you're going to have way more of that skill set in order to compete in the job economy of the future.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It was actually like extremely helpful for me. I took a year off from like in between my two major chapters of my career thus far, and it's like traveling, my wife and I helped her run her Etsy shops, and like she was doing like pretty good revenue, like for like especially by Etsy standards, and she was like featured on the front of Etsy, and things were like but I learned, so I was like helping her with that business, having zero ties to the product. She's making like women's accessories and designing stuff on shower curtains and things like that. I couldn't care less about the product itself, but I learned a ton about what it meant to like run an e-commerce shop and to see, I mean, it's literally just her, and she's like got this location independent lifestyle, building it from scratch essentially, and building it out of her passion on top of that, which I think is awesome. As much as somebody might love wiener dog ramps, like, this literally was her thing. And anyway, I say all that because it was extremely valuable and paid so many dividends when I like got back into like real work in like the tech world and And so I
Does she
think
still
a
do
lot
that?
of those skills translate. Yeah, she does.
That's
She's got,
awesome.
I mean, she basically migrated away from she had two, and basically just has one now. One of them is very autopilot and the other one is more like hands-on.
And it's still on Etsy?
Yeah. So she's got the autopilot one still running. I mean, that's all drop ship. It's you click on it, you buy it, the factory sends it out, and that's that's the way people are doing it. I know somebody else who's like got a Amazon shop selling kettlebells, just kettlebells.
That's tough because that's heavy.
Yeah, I don't know how they do. I don't know the details, but they do well. And so, yeah, I mean, talking about the skill set, I think the question then is like, you've seen a lot of these businesses. People will write in and ask question like, what do you think about starting an Amazon shop? What do you think about starting I'm just going to start a Shopify website. Like, what advice do you give to people in terms of like, these are the skill sets you should have, or this is you should go learn from this place? I'd like to take a chance right now to plug Parable because I think that's a great place to go, which we'll drop the link into. That's one of Mitko's products. But what are some of those skills, like skills, hard skills, soft skills, and then also just like any resources that someone listening that wants to build this location independent lifestyle, live that remote life, but also have like this thriving business and revenue generator?
Yeah, so I appreciate the plug. So I would say I always advise people start simple. Like I think a lot of people go into it really overcomplicating things, and they try, they like read these books or they hear somebody talking about like passive income online, and they really like start at step 4 instead of at step 1. So I would say is start simple, like start freelancing. That's why the first case study report that we did in Parable was about freelancing, because it's trading time for money, which is not sexy. You can make a lot of money freelancing. And I can tell you the numbers because I have them now. And I can tell you just how much money some of these people are making, how quickly freelancing. The reason why I say start there is I have this formula that I when I've coached people, I always focus on, which is DFPP: discovery, focus, pattern, productize. What's really important is a lot of people try to come up with a business idea, right? Like this is what's sexy. Like what kind of ideas do you have for businesses? And I don't care about ideas. What I care about is who you're going to help. Because when you become very interested in a specific type of person, right? When I said business is the art of solving problems at scale, who has those problems, right? What you want to become obsessed with is a type of person, because when you get to know those people and you start working with them, right, as a freelancer or whatever it may be, you're going to start learning about their problems. And so my first thing is like most people start with a skill set they have, right? Like whatever it may be, copywriting, design, you're a web developer, whatever that skill might be. And that's the discovery phase. You start there, you start with your skill, and you're going to work with whoever it may be. The next step up that I always suggest people do is to focus on a specific type of person and use your skill set to help them. Because when you focus on that specific type of person, that specific like quote unquote industry, you would begin to spot the patterns, right? DFPP. The third step is pattern. Start to spot the patterns of the problem coming up over and over and over again. And patterns are places to productize around, right? So when you start to see the same problem over and over and over and over again, then you know that it's something that you can create a product around that then can sell at scale, that removes you out of it or removes your time out of it as much. And a lot of people try to skip directly to that third or fourth step. And this is like VC money goes there, because VCs think, well, instead of you spending time going through step 1, 2, and so on and so forth and figuring it out, you have this idea, you have this hypothesis of that there's this product, this problem that exists. Here's $1 million, burn through it. Like, let's find product market fit and go for it, right? And that works. But if you don't want to do that, the slower but far more secure way is to start from step 1. And the benefit of starting there is you start making money from day 1. So it's not this thing where you're like, oh, for the last 2 years, I've been trying to find my business idea. And you really don't learn anything, because at that point, you're not like doing anything. You're just kind of like thinking or dreaming or like poking things, but you're not really like getting out there and like learning those skills and failing and really figuring it out. So I always say is like, start easy. Start with your skill, sell it to whoever will buy it, right? Like use these, I'm not a big fan of Upwork, but like use a marketplace like Upwork to get your, to kind of start getting some practice, and then focus on a specific person that you really enjoy working with, or they have a lot of, I want to say this, then I'll let you jump in, is a lot of people talk about passion and, I'm trying to find what I'm passionate about. And it's one of these things that drives me insane, because it's not something that you sit there and you think about like, what am I passionate about? The way that you find something you're passionate about is you start working on things and you find challenges that are interesting, right? So I always say is like find an industry, find a certain type of person whose problems are interesting or curious to you. And when you start working on those things and then people say like, oh man, thank you so much for helping me out with this problem that I was having, such a pain in the butt and you did such a good job. The way you build passion is when you're like, oh, I did do a good job and I helped this person. And that happens over and over and over again. And that's how you build passion, right? You're the head of remote at Doist. It's something that you're passionate about. I bet if I asked you 10 years ago, like, Chase, are you passionate about the way that you structure, on-site team retreats? You'd probably be like, no. But now that you've done it and you're good at it and you've seen kind of the interesting parts about it, you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm passionate about it. It's exciting, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, you kind of find the passion through the journey, I think, as corny as that sounds. But like, you have to like get on the path before you can figure out what part of the path you really enjoy. You can't just like invent the view before you've had some opportunity to discover it for yourself. I see that all the time too, man. It's funny you mentioned that, and I think there's something, the Great Resignation is real. Like from a company standpoint, like companies are seeing people just churn at incredible rates, and not just because they're running to something else, but people want to change. They're looking to find themselves. They've just been through a really rough period with the pandemic and everything. So people are reinventing the way that they want to identify, and a lot of how we identify is with how we work, what we do, our purpose. And so I think a lot of people are going through this right now. Like they're asking themselves, what am I passionate about? What do I want to do? What I want to be entrepreneurial, but I don't really know what to start with. And I think that's such incredible advice because you hit the nail on the head. That's where everybody goes. It's like, what am I passionate about? And it's not always the best place to jump off from to start. Like you talk about Doist, right? Like our CEO, Amir, built Todoist, the product, which now serves like 30 million people in 19 different languages and like is risen to be like its leader in its space, which is really hard to do.
Which I'm a fanboy of, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but I'm a huge Todoist fanboy. I just did a 30-minute Todoist like walkthrough with a buddy of mine, where he was like, hey man, like I need like a to-do app. Like I know you're a big fan of Todoist. I'm like, yeah, here, let me show you. And like I got on like a Zoom like screen. I was like, this is how I do this. Here's how I use it. And I got a text from him yesterday and he goes, Todoist is fucking awesome.
I love it, man. Well, I mean, that's not a product that was built out of passion. Like Amir wasn't like, dude, I am very passionate.
The to-do space.
Like I got to get into the to-do. I've been yearning to get into the to-do space since I can remember. He's like, I need a to-do list and the to-do list sucks and I'm going to build my own. And then other people started buying it. And then you have a multi-million-dollar business. And so this is really good advice. If we were chatting before we started recording about this guy that who's like selling printer ink and like just crushing it, selling printer ink.
But also to add on to this, I'm sorry that I'm interrupting you, but I think it's important to say is like, I actually sometimes think you should actively not start a business around what you're passionate about because it might kill that thing. Like my mom loves to knit. And she's like, I just want to have a knitting business. And I'm like, Mom, I don't know that you want to have a knitting business. What you want is you want to knit more, right? That's what she thinks it means by having a knitting business. But if you start a knitting business, all of a sudden in your realm of knitting, what works into it is like accounting and like sales. And like there's a bunch of this other stuff that you don't care that now you're going to start to associate with this thing that you love and has been a true passion for you. So what I kind of say is like, find something else that allows you to, very few of those people. And I think it's okay that they remain as small. That is the lucky people, is the ones who like genuinely, they're like, listen, my number one passion in life is this, and I have a business in it and it's great. Like that's a very small percentage of people, but a much larger percentage of people. In fact, I think everyone can do this, is to have something that then allows them to like go full deep on whatever their passion is.
Well, and I think for you and I, that's probably the case in terms of like what we have today, what we were aspiring to. Like, yeah, I do love my work as like, I really enjoy my work as the head of remote and doing the things I get to do, but it still is a job. But what I really love about it is that it affords me this lifestyle, which allows me to live where I want and travel a lot. And like, that's my real passion. But I'm purposefully, intentionally not becoming a tour guide,
Yeah.
just because I love traveling. And so because that would taint it. I mentioned earlier, like my wife's business is like, she's an artist by trade, but the two shops that she has, she kind of shut down the artistic one, the one that really was like, that got her fired up at first, because the art became a job. And, that it started to like fade and taint the idea of like, she's like, I never want to just go like paint anymore for fun, like to like clear my mind. Now it's like, it's a job. It's not, I'm not passionate anymore. So I think that's good advice.
That happens a lot with artists. I spoke with another person this month who was like, she was a freelance designer, but she said what's been really hard is not only do I feel like I'm making enough money yet, like she was like just getting started. So she's like, I'm not making a lot of money doing this, but now I'm working on all these like art projects for clients, and art was like my escape, right? Like when I was feeling stressed, I'd go and I'd like draw. She's like, I can't do that because when I go to draw for myself, I start thinking about work and it becomes like, well, you should be working. And like, she's like, all of a sudden I have like two negatives, right? Where it's like, I'm doing this business that's like at the moment really hard because I'm not making enough money out of it just yet. And I've lost my like escape, which was art. And now she's kind of like, where do I go? So
have you interviewed anybody on your show, or like just maybe one of the case studies on Parable, like that made a transition from just like your everyday average Joe kind of like job to like, hey, I started this business and now I'm living my dream, location independent, traveling, making money. Do you have anybody that like comes to mind?
Specifically as a freelancer?
Not necessarily. I mean, could be a freelancer. I'm kind of wondering like I'm looking for like the inspiration I get, like that, like caricature of what someone might be aspiring to.
So I have someone who I'll give him a shout out, Francis. Do you know Francis Nyan? So Francis he's got an amazing story. So he, in his early 20s, I believe, I might be butchering the story here. I'm sorry, Francis, but paraphrasing the story here. In his early 20s, he was a drug addict, like very, very badly, addicted to drugs, and, sought help. But in his early 20s, he was, a drug addict. He sought help. He started working, he was able to fight through that. He started working in education, and he moved. He was like, I'd always wanted to travel. He's from Memphis. And so he moved to Budapest, where he was working as a teacher. And while he was working as a teacher, he was like, it was great, but I was like making not really any money. I was in like my mid 20s. And he mentioned to one of the kids' parents that he was interested in like copywriting because he had heard about it. Like, he liked to write. And this dad said, we've been looking for a copywriter for my company. If you'd like to, come in here and like write whatever it was. And so he started copywriting that way. And he went from being a teacher, to then now he has a very successful. He's one of our case studies in the Parable freelance pack. He does like over $120,000 a year right now, writing copy for e-commerce businesses, specifically like email marketing copy. And he's doing like 120 plus. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's over $120,000 a year, and works like 4 to 5 hours a day, Monday through. I think he takes one day off a week. He just moved with his girlfriend from Budapest to Portugal, and he always has this thing. When I love his story because he's like, I'm in my like late 20s now. I think he's not 30 yet. He's like, when I was in my early 20s, I was a drug addict, and then slowly got my things together, became a teacher, and then now he's like, had you told me when I was 21 that I was going to be making over $100,000 a year, being able to like work a few hours a day and living in Lisbon, Portugal, I would have thought you're crazy.
Yeah, and like living in Portugal on 120K, like you're living good. Like that's not a bad existence at all. You mentioned earlier you don't like Upwork, so like is he using Upwork, or are there any other sites well, first I really want to know why you don't like Upwork. I'm just curious. I don't really care, and then I'm also curious if you have any other like backup suggestions, like where the next Francis find their freelance jobs.
I know I said I don't like Upwork, but there's some people who really hate those freelancing marketplaces, and I'm marketplace agnostic. Meaning a lot of people, I think the reason why I don't like it is because some people just like assume that like that's like they focus only on Upwork, for example. And what I say is like, no, it's a marketing channel. So you're a freelancer who offers these services and you have a whole bunch of marketing channels at your disposal. One of them can be Upwork, another can be Fiverr. Like look at these marketplaces as channels of clients, and people don't like them because they take a hefty fee, right? Yeah. Like they're taking some heavy fees from folks. And I'm like, okay, fine. Increase your prices on Upwork however much you need to compensate for that fee. And if you get 1 or 2 clients a year from that, sick, right? Like that's awesome. The reason why freelancers don't like those platforms is because you get a lot of talent on that platform specifically. There's other ones who do a better job. Like I really like TopTal, for example, as a platform that does things a bit differently. Like Upwork, you get a whole bunch of these people who are either driving the cost to the bottom, right? And they're playing that pricing game. Or what a lot of people do on Upwork, where a lot of these freelancers that make a lot of money on Upwork are actually talent farms. So you have like one person whose profile is on there. When you hire them, you actually find out that this designer you hired is actually passing on the work to like the 10, 15 designers in India. And I've been in this case before where I'm like, why is the turnaround on this so slow? And he's like, well, my designers are working. I'm like, well, I'm not paying your designers. I'm working with you. So like you didn't mention this anywhere, in when we started working. And so I think that's the issue. I also think like I'm a big fan of make it a win-win for everyone. And I think freelancers that are on Upwork feel a bit taken advantage of in some ways from Upwork because they're taking such high fees. My whole thing is it should be a membership, because I think any freelancer, if you say, hey, pay me $500 a year or whatever it is, and we'll have a membership where you can post your profile and we'll bring in big companies, right? And you just pay your fee and you get access to all of these job offers these companies are coming to us for. And like you make as much money as you want, right? We keep our fee the same. So I think starting out at a place like Upwork is great to figure it out, because then it's cheap entry, right? 20% that they're taking off of like your $100 project or whatever, like it's a drop in the bucket. Like you're just learning at this point. The money's not what's important, is that you're learning. But when you advance, I think that's where it makes a lot more sense to go to a place where it's a lot more like you pay our fee, we bring in big companies that have like really, really good offers for you, and you make as much money as you want to make, right? We always take the same amount.
That is really good points. I have not really thought about it from those vantage points, so I'm glad you mentioned them. It also that concept of like the sort of the agency concept of where you're just talking about this guy who you've hired one guy who's actually outsourcing it to his team, which is somewhere else. Am I saying it correctly to refer to that as some people would call that, I guess, an agency, and it is sort of this model of like I know some people who are pretty successful who don't do a whole lot of work. They're basically like farming. They're out there. They take in the work. They're the face. They interact with the client, but they're basically outsourcing everything to freelancers. Like they're going on Upwork and then hiring other people to actually do the work.
They're like white labeling other people's service. I think it's fine. I don't care as long as the expectations are laid out, right? Like I don't like when someone's trying to hide from me that that's what's happening, and like it's not my first rodeo. Like not only do I know what you're doing, I can like read your hand, right? Like when you're like, oh yeah, like let me get back to you, and it takes you 6 hours to get back to me, I know what's going on here, right? So I'm perfectly okay with it when it's all laid out, right? Like when you say like, hey, here's what I do, and in that case, like I think people should do as much as possible of things in which is their like superpower, right? Like I'm one of these people that like, I don't believe that you should work on your weaknesses, but you should focus on your strengths. And some people's strengths are just like getting clients, right? Like my wife is amazing. It's like my wife crushes client work because she's like clients love her. Like she has this personality that like completely, they feel very disarmed. Like she gets clients very well. And she like loves getting clients. But then afterwards, like the work is kind of like she can do it and she does a really good job with it, but it's not like what excites her. So I've always told her like, you go land the clients and then just, tell the clients that you white label this out to people who are really good at doing like what you are selling them as a service. And I think that's amazing. And that's great. But yeah, agency work is great. I mean, I have background in the agency world, and the thing that I kind of recommend to people is try to skip the agency stage. Like try to go from being a very high paid freelancer to then being like a productized service, and skip the middle ground of agency work, because that can get like really, really tough and stressful.
Yeah, you're never going to there is a ceiling there. Like you can only take in and refilter so much stuff like unless you just want to work 24 hours a day. Even then there's always going to be a limit. Whereas if you can productize it, that's when you can reach that, like unlock that next level.
Yeah. And agencies come like with a lot of management. And I'm not saying there's not agencies that do it well. There for sure are, but vast majority of agencies just like so much, like there's so many people involved to like essentially like every time you want to grow, you have to also grow like, okay, well, we need to bring on like 5 more people, and that brings on like this whole management challenge. And then now you have like a team of developers, so you need to hire like a manager for the team. It just becomes like a very, very slow ship to move. And eventually most agencies try to find some way to like productize a service anyways. And so my whole thing is like, skip that whole step. Like, go from being like a very highly leveraged, highly paid freelancer, understand what those problems are that keep happening over and over and over again, and then just try to spin out like productized services instead of getting stuck in that middle ground of the agency world.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this, because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers. So they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Like, for someone that just that's hearing you say productize, like, can you illustrate that somehow for like in like a, even if we're using like widgets, just like the most basic examples? Because I could see like, how do you take like this, like the service and turn it into a product? I think that transition is really important and maybe hard to capture.
So there's 2 main ways to productize, right? Is like to create a product or to create a productized service. So with the product route, I think it's like fairly self-explaining, but I'll give you an example. I have a friend who had an agency. They were doing web development for a non-WordPress website. So a lot of them were like Shopify websites. And those websites notoriously have like bad blogs for SEO. And so they kept having a lot of clients coming in and saying like, hey, can you custom build me a blog for my Shopify store? Because the one that comes out of the box is just not good enough. So they kept having to do that over and over and over again. Patterns, right? They spotted a pattern. And so they said, okay, why don't we build a tool internally so that when clients come to us, we have the thing built that we can just give it to them. And it worked really well. So they said, let's spin it out into our own company. And so they launched it as a separate company, which did so well. They shut down the agency and now they're doing 7 figures with that one product, with that one like software. So that's a product that came out of a service, right? Where they kept seeing their same clientele was asking for the same thing over and over and over again. They said, okay, well, they're asking about it all the time. Let's spin out something that we can do just plug and play, right? So that's a product. I'll give you a specific productized service. Let me think of a good one. So we had at the agency, we worked with like HVAC companies, which HVAC is like heating and air conditioning. So talking about sexy businesses.
Yeah, super sexy. That guy, whoever owns that little HVAC business in Cincinnati is like rolling in millions. I mean,
dude, HVAC is a great business. Like, especially like if right now you're young and hustling and you have like, you get this online stuff coming in and buying one of these like mom and pop businesses that's already doing like $3 million a year, but they still do everything on paper, and you just digitize that, where do you go to find that? Like that's the question, man. It's like that sounds great. How do I find that? Like, I have no idea. I mean, at the moment, there's this big trend there's entire funds right now that all they do is they go and buy boomer businesses, because the boomer generation has a ton of small businesses, but they're in this position where the kids maybe don't want to take over the HVAC business that their dad's been running for the last 50 years. And so these people are being left with this like thing like, okay, well, I was building this business for my kids. Now they don't want to take it over. Do I just like turn it off? Or like, they don't know how to, these are not like entrepreneurs. They're HVAC people who started a business around their skill. And so there's these funds that are literally going in and buying up boomer businesses and doing exactly this. So the way that I would do it is I would say is like, whatever your area is, go knock on the doors and say like, hey, how's it going, Joe? I see, if you're ever thinking about like shutting this business down or your kids don't want to take it over, like call me first. I'd love to come in. Like, it takes like some hustle to do it that way.
Yeah, sure. That's okay. I mean, you got to have a little hustle in you if you want to, you want to do this right.
Some family friends of ours, he used to work at one of the big consulting firms, but I think his dad owned it, if I remember this correctly, owned a metal treatment plant. And so when his dad was retiring, he took over his dad's metal treatment plant. Not something that I think he's particularly passionate about before he started working this, and then got funding and bought the next 2 or 3 competitors around him that were about the same size, merged them together, and now he crushes, man. Like, it's a great business, and like they do metal treating, for like, I don't really know what that means, but it's one of those cases where they were like retiring and he came in, young guy with like Bain consulting background. So he knew the numbers really well. He had he knew how to do like digital stuff, and he like rolled them up into one, and now is like one of the more modern competitors in that space. So yeah, I think what were we talking? Oh, HVAC service. Yeah. So what we did was these local businesses do something called mail drops, which are when you have some sort of deal, right? Like, hey, we're doing 20% off updating your heating or whatever. They'll do a mail drop, which is a bunch of zip codes. You get like a pamphlet in your mailbox. I'm sure you've gotten like something like that before. And so you have this entire, series of processes there where it's like, okay, what are the zip codes that this is going to? Who is going to design this? Where do they go? When they see the design and the pamphlet, where do they go to access that offer? Like, there's a whole bunch of series of steps that need to be done. And so what we did was we productize that entire process. So it was like, we had a designer who, the moment that we said we had like 20 or 30 different templates, we said, okay, we have a mail drop coming in, the designer go grab their logo, whatever. Like, we had it all steps. The designer puts it together, builds, hands it off to the web developer. They build the landing page on the client's website. Then that goes to our person who worked with like the mail drop facilities, and they submit it all and it goes. So it's like, literally we would sell to clients like, hey, here it is for like $1,000 or whatever it is. We can hit like 4 zip codes. They say go, and it just turns it on. The whole thing just like shifts out. So that's like a productized service where you take these human elements and you kind of string them together in more of like a process type. And this is where like head of remote comes in very handy, which I was actually just talking about this with my wife, and I was like, I think I was the head of remote at our agency before that was like, I knew what that was, because like we built out these we built out this entire like SOP structure and who communicates how and like what is the handoff happening and that kind of stuff. So that's like an example of a productized service that's not that sexy in terms of mail drops.
Yeah. It's a good, that's the perfect example though. I think like that's the kind of stuff that is actually going to work and kind of what we need to hear. So
can I throw another idea here? Because this is one that I've been itching to tell someone. So when I dropped out of college, I went back to my high school job. I was working as a lifeguard, to pay the bills. And pool tech businesses are another one of these HVAC sections where like pool tech is great because it's a very like refined skill. It's a lot of money. You go and you install a pool, all that kind of stuff. Pool maintenance, you can like roll it in after. It's for like a recurring cost. So it's like a great business, one of these boomer type businesses that these funds really like. Lifeguard staffing is super, super hard because you get like, there's usually like 2 or 3 companies in like a big city that do the pool staffing for all the different pools in the area. If you think about who they employ, are lifeguards who are like 14 or 15, whatever is legal, to like 18, right? Like they have this like teenager age and they kind of age out. And every single summer, like the pool company, the lifeguard staffing company that I worked for, we needed to hire 1,500 people every summer.
Whoa. Were you working at like a giant water park?
No, we had so our company, which I was actually like, I got not high up in, but as high as I could without like being involved in it because I didn't want to be involved in it, was like we staffed all the pools in the Cincinnati area. So like hundreds of pools, right? And we're the people who put in we trained the lifeguards, we put the lifeguards in there to work, all that kind of stuff. And every spring you had to hire 1,500 new teenagers to essentially staff. And some percentage of those returned, but blah, 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 whatever. And do you know how we would hire people? Was like I would like bang my head against the wall because they're like, okay, we're going to play an ad before the movie at the movie theater. And I'm like, no one watches that. right? Or like I got sent to like high schools to sit at like a table during lunch for these like 14, 15-year olds, like, hey, like I see, you know what I mean? Like I was like handing out pamphlet, like it was just so stupid. And I kept saying, like, why aren't you running Facebook ads, right? Like, or Instagram, like this is several years ago. Like right now I'd be running TikTok ads, right? And just saying like, hey, you need to hire 1,500 people. Like we can do this at scale, and like we'll just do this for you like every spring. And because there's 1,500 people to hire is madness, and it's the biggest pain point for these companies. So here's an idea: if you're looking for a business idea, is hiring for lifeguard staff.
That's the niche right there. That's the next up and coming trend. Watch out when it comes summer next year, man. Everybody that listens to this show is going to be like that lifeguard hiring trend. I know this girl, or I don't know her personally. Sorry, I know of this girl that her family was like they immigrated, I believe, from Morocco to Spain and opened up a little fruit stand. And in Spain, it's like in the cities on every corner there's a fruit stand, and you can get your basic fruits and vegetables, and it's really cheap. And like it just you think like you would not look at it and see this like thriving business. This girl's family had amassed like 40 of them across Spain, like little fruit stand mafia. Yeah. And she then went to, and they were making like millions. And then she went to university, got a MBA, and like to come back and run the fruit stand, but to digitize it and to like productize it. And like, so apparently this girl like who like grew up as a child in like a rough region of Morocco, like comes to Spain, family starts a fruit stand, like a generation later, she's like a location independent multi-millionaire selling oranges to the rest of us schmucks walking through town to work every day. And she's like sitting on the beach in Portugal and loving life. And I just thought like that is such an epic story of like how the internet has changed people's lives and opened up like, you know, I talk to people on the show all the time who have made cool location independent lives for themselves because they work remotely, they're copywriters, they work at remote companies, or maybe they're flight attendants and they get to travel around the world that way. And like stories like that really make me smile because it's like your life could have been so not just like a little bit more fun now because you get to travel, like your life is drastically changed because of the internet.
Well, and like another perfect example of that is the same way that we're talking about digitizing, right? I think remotifying is very similar because you get into some of these like, you know, some of these industries where if you're the remote option, you can offer way better prices because maybe you don't have overhead. Like there's a whole bunch of things that you can do and essentially win out in an industry that's otherwise backwards because you're remote first. So did you have Neil on the podcast yet? Did I connect you with Neil Parekh?
No, I don't think so. No.
I thought I connect. Okay. So Neil, he runs a remote first apartment cleaning company called Made This. And you need to have him on the podcast. So now he's franchising it. And the whole thing is, well, you know, there's a whole bunch of these like maids that run like, you know, they work for like 20 houses or whatever. And he said, I came in and I essentially like automated and like digitize the whole business where I have like, you know, like a software that plans out like, okay, you're going to this house, you know, like you know, that the calendar is all like planned out and I know how to market online. So I'm like winning all this business and like doing very well. And now he's franchising it as a business model. So you can like go out and like buy, you know, your area in Minnesota or whatever. And he comes in and teaches you, okay, great, here's how you digitize it. And they're just cleaning up because a lot of these businesses aren't like that. So there's so many of these. Yeah. Remotifying and digitizing.
Yeah. Cutting. I mean, it's like you said in the beginning, solving problems at scale and cutting down on figuring out how to cut down on costs and offer something in a slightly different way is a huge part of that.
So that same guy that we were talking about earlier before we hit record, that was one of my first big business mentors who was McDonald's consultant who then like, you know, bought the McDonald's. So we were talking with him about how like a lot of these franchisees need accounting and it's like very specific accounting to like McDonald's franchises and they have to get these like accounting firms. And I was like, dude, no, just get a bunch of like stay-at-home moms who have accounting experience. You tell them like, hey, you can work remotely, work your own hours, like take care of the kids. And we work specifically with like McDonald's franchises because they all have the same problems. And there's another one of those. And you charge less than everyone else because you don't have an office and there's stay-at-home moms who are like 4 hours a day while the kids are at school. And then they get to like pick up and drop off their kids and everyone's happy.
Solving the same problem over and over again doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but it's very lucrative. Like that, like you're like, I'm going to do McDonald's, you know, I'm going to be really, I got some really good business advice early on that was just like, it's really hard to be really good at everything for everyone. And I think there's there's a lot to be said for that. Like people get into one business or they have like a skill set, maybe that skill set is like writing, but then you think, okay, I'm going to write blog posts. I'm going to do copywriting. I'm going to do website. I'm going to like find your niche, get your niche, get really good at that, establish yourself as a brand and a leader in that space. And it can be very narrow and then expand from there. I think that's something that I've, a trend that I've noticed is like has been kind of a red thread that's connected a lot of the successful people that I know.
And this is why I say like really find your people and like focus on who you want to work with for like the next 20 or 30 years, because then you can just keep coming back to the same well, right? Yeah. Like they're going to have, like you solve one problem for them, come back to the well, they're going to have another one. And people always have problems. Like I usually bring up the case of like Laura Roeder. You ever heard of Laura Roeder before? She was one of like the very first like social media training agency type things. Like she spoke at the White House about how social media can like help your business. So like very early on. Wow. And she had this company called, oh my God, this is gonna, I'm not gonna remember what it was called, but it was like a social media scheduling tool, because what she would teach her clients in her agency was that like, hey, just because you post once this blog and it does well, doesn't mean that you can't reshare it. So when it worked really well, because they'd be like, oh, great, every 3 months I'm gonna share this article and it's gonna do really well, but they didn't follow through with it because it's kind of like a lot of time intensive. So she made a software that just like, okay, every 3 months I want this blog post to be reshared. Crushed, right? And she sold it for, I don't remember how much million. I think it was like an 8-figure exit. But then she went back to that same well of people and found a smaller subset of them, which was like coaches. And she found another problem that they were having and spun out like another software for them. So she kind of like found the issue, spun out a product, sold it, came back to the same well, started another project. It's the same core people that she's helping.
Wow. That's a model that we should all be following, apparently. Man, this has been super insightful. I feel like there's a million questions one could ask Mitko on these subjects, but we're going to leave some for some questions dangling in the air so people go listen to that remote life and get the answers for themselves, man. Yeah, thank you so much. Is there anything else you feel like we should touch on? Like, I just generally wanted to cover the subject of, I'm Joe, I'm sitting at my real estate office in XYZ town back home, and I really want to live that remote life and start an online business, but I don't know where to start. I feel like we filled in a lot of blanks here in a pretty short period of time, but if there's anything else that comes to mind that you feel like we should touch on, feel free to throw it in here. If not, I think it's also a good time just to mention like where people can come learn more and follow along.
Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you for having me, by the way. I always love to chat with you. But I think for anyone listening, if you want to do this, like, the important thing is like start with the skills that you have and then find the people that you want to work with and then just follow that DFPP model. Like I've seen that work over and over and over again, just from like case studies and speaking with people. So I really think that's very important. And then the other thing that we've kind of been dancing around is this idea of like a remote local business, which is a local business that you just bring remote, like methodology to it. Neil is the guy that you need to talk with about that. I'll for sure. I thought I connected. And I think that that's a huge opportunity. So especially for these people that are like, I don't want to be a digital nomad, but I'd love the opportunity for 3 months out of the year to be able to take my family to Europe and like travel around while the business is still running. I think that's a killer, like opportunity there. And then in terms of if any of this sounded interesting, yeah, check out the podcast, thatremotelife.com. You can find all the episodes there. And then if the freelancing stuff that I talked about that's interesting, I have a publishing company called Parable where we publish case studies of online businesses and industries. And what we've really focused on right now is the freelancing reports, because as an industry, like I said, it's so important, especially in the beginning when you're getting started. And it's a great way to just get a shortcut, get started, because what we have is over 140 pages of analysis of the industry, specifically with like trends and numbers and like a SWOT analysis, like what are the opportunities here? What are some of the, things to look out for? We did 20 individual case studies where we dove into like individual freelancers' businesses. Like how much did you make? How much are you charging? What services are you offering? At what year did you make how much? And then really pulled all that information out and said, what are the things we can learn from here that you can like take into your own business? And we did tech stack, so you can see exactly what softwares these people are using to build their businesses and offer their services. So if that sounds interesting to you, just head on over to joinparable.com. And by the time this goes out, it's going to be live. So you can get your hands on that report.
Dude, I've seen some of the work. You've been nice enough to share some of it with me. And I mean, I'm not just saying this, like it is epic, because it gives you that playbook to success that everybody wants. Like you don't want to have to figure it all out on your own. You can take your lumps, you can go through and you can figure out the tech stack and the the websites to use and the skill sets and how to market yourself and all that. But that takes time and effort. And like when you just have something that says, this is how 20 people did exactly that. And like, here, just like skip to finish, like it's getting a cheat code. And I'm super impressed by the content itself. I've only seen some of it, but like what I have seen is super impressive. And I'm excited for Parable. And yeah, I'm sure people will be checking it out. So yeah, man, thank you so much. Always good to catch up with you.
I almost forgot to say this. I'm sorry. But if you're coming from this podcast, you'll get 15% off on the, so we'll give you a code that maybe you can put in the show notes. Yeah, I almost forgot to say it, so I'm glad that I jumped in here. But yes, you get 15% off on the pack. So head on over to the show notes, and I'll have the code for you there that you can share, Chase, with folks, so that you can get it a little bit cheaper.
Did I tell you I started a new tradition on About Abroad? I was inspired by the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett's website or podcast. It's like the #1 business podcast in Europe. Very European these days. I've been over here so long now. I'm listening to European podcasts. It's awesome, actually. The Diary of a CEO is fantastic.
You take over 14 days of vacation. Like, what is this?
Yeah, I know. And we have benefits and it's crazy. Anyway, and the Diary of a CEO, he has this awesome tradition where his previous guest leaves a question for the next guest. And I don't know it. You don't know who you're leaving the question for. You're just leaving a question. So you will be, after this, you will be leaving a question for the next guest, and you don't know who that is. But this previous person left a question for you. And I'm looking at it now. Interestingly, it has nothing to do with your lifestyle. So I'm just curious to hear how it, I thought about cheating. I'm not going to lie. I thought about being like, this one doesn't really apply, but
no. That's what's fun.
So this question goes, how do you think the digital nomad game will change as people start traveling more with their children and families? What advice would you give if you have any? So, you don't have kids, but you have a dog and you're a digital nomad with a dog, which counts for something, even though I've gotten chastised before for making that comparison. Yeah, I've gotten whipped like verbally for that. So I don't mean to draw that comparison, but there is some truth. It is a bit difficult to travel with a dog. But anyway, I think it is interesting because you do have a lot of insight into the digital nomad game, which we didn't get to talk about a lot today. So this is a chance to chime in on the subject.
So interestingly, it's something that I have a little bit of work in. So I think what you'll start to see, this is my guess, is that you're going to see the development of what I've been calling like family education pods, where you end up traveling as a family group, kind of like, like Remote Year or those sort of brands that are kind of just individuals at the moment. Something similar, but with families and one teacher. And then you're going to have a system, a group of teachers that when there's a specialty, like, we're going to learn science today, you zoom in that person, but you have like a homeroom teacher that's in your pod that you travel with from like, wherever to wherever to wherever, and you're going to be able to pay. And then that way your kids are getting a really good high level education. They're also getting skills together. They're hanging out with other peers, and the families are getting together, and there's like a little community pod that moves, every 3 months or whatever, you'll be able to like, I think, purchase like however much you want to do it. But I think that that's going to be the future in terms of, a lot of these like now remote parents who are, working for a company like Doist, for example, and they're like, hey, we want a nomad, but we have kids. How do we do this? Like, we want them to have friends. We want them to be getting good schooling that's consistent from place to place. I think there's going to be some sort of solution for that. Another thing is like these education, like family specific locations around the world where they're saying like, hey, come here. It's a midterm rental kind of thing. And what we look for specifically is families. And they may have some sort of education things on the ground there for them. I think this is one of those nodes in the work from anywhere infrastructure that I'm very interested in. So yeah. Did I answer the question or did I just like talk a lot?
No, I mean both, but that's what we do here. So you did answer the question, and actually, interestingly, in the end, it kind of does tie back to your expertise, because it is like filling a void, solving a problem at scale that will continue to become a bigger problem, quote unquote, for people as they take their work on the road and take their life on the road and want to bring their families along with them. So yeah, I'm also really interested in this space. So actually, I'm super happy that question came to you. That worked out well, man. Thanks for coming by, dude. This was awesome. Always good to see you. I hope we can do it more often.
Of course. Anytime.
All right, buddy. We'll see you soon. Stay safe. Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.